Okay. All right, well, welcome back to this, the final session of today's event. My name is Norman Lewis. I am a visiting research fellow at MCC Brussels. Unless you've been living somewhere in a cave, you would have heard of AI, and you would have heard that AI is now apparently going to solve everybody's problems. It's going to solve Europe's problems, America's problems. The entire world is now beholden to AI. And I think what we want to do in this session is just interrogate this, particularly in relation to the EU in the light of the discussion that we've been having here today. And to ask, where the EU stands on AI, situated in the context of what's happening globally, but then ask a number of very important questions about, what the EU has actually done in AI. And the only thing that you can point to, which is of any significance, is the Artificial Intelligence Act, which just came into to law recently. And that raises a very important question, which is that what appears to be happening in Europe is that the EU has become very good at regulating AI, regulating other people's technology, but its ability to itself produce that technology seems to be severely hampered. And so, that's really what we want to look at. What are the barriers? What are the real barriers here? And, what is the potential of AI to actually help transform the European economy? To do that, I have a very good speaker, somebody I've known for almost 40 years. And just to share a little something about Keith and myself, is that we actually did something in the 1980s which was pioneering in the computing world, where we connected a Commodore 64. Now, most of you won't know what a Commodore 64 was. It was a microcomputer, you remember? And that was the computer that Bill Gates said, but no, he didn't see any reason why computers would need more than 64K memory. Do you remember that? This is Bill Gates. Right. Anyway, we connected one of these computers to a phototypesetting machine. This was about 5 years before the desktop publishing revolution took place. And in fact, if I'm right, Keith, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is even mentioned in the American Computing History Museum in Silicon Valley, that this is what we did. So I'll take your applause now. Thank you.
By the way, we just made the coffee.
And Keith told the story. Anyway, Keith is very well qualified to speak about the subject we're going to be looking at, because he is a serial entrepreneur, has been very, very successful. In fact, he was the guy who founded the first internet service provider in the UK, EasyNet, which went on to become a very big company in 29 countries in Europe. Keith cashed out too early, but anyway, as a consequence...
I did all right.
He did all right, but with that success, he left the UK and went to Silicon Valley, where he's been from the 1980s onwards, 1990s onwards, where he's become a serial entrepreneur. He's now in the venture field, is the CEO of a company called SignalRank, which is bringing AI to the VC experience. And so I do think he's in a very good position to talk about not only the theory, but the practicalities of what AI is and what it potentially can do. And then he and I will have a conversation about how this might impact on the European scale, and then we'll open it up to the audience like we do in most cases. So, Keith.
Fantastic. I have some friends in the room who know me quite well, and I should say that where I was born, which is in Yorkshire, most sentences start with AI. AI, yeah, I think I'm going out. So when you hear me say AI, it will conjure up memories in their minds of where I'm from. So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to talk a lot about technology, and AI is the latest, but I just want to start by not assuming that everyone has the same meaning to the word technology. And it's really important you understand what I mean by it. The word technology to me sums up what the human race is currently capable of and can produce tools to achieve. So technology is not a thing separate from us. It's what we build and what we have done. And often because of the headlines in the tabloid press about big tech, the impression is given that tech is somehow separate and not human. But it is actually the pinnacle of human achievement. And at every stage in history, that achievement tends to go up. I don't want to give us a long history since the wheel to AI. We all know it tends to go up because we get cleverer and we can do more things. And those things that we see, they're us. Embodied in them is us. And so we should never talk about technology as something separate from us. And that's as true for AI, even though it's clever and can do autonomous things. But it does them because we tell it to. And that's the core of everything. So as technology evolves, the human race gets to create its life on Earth, on new, let's call them canvases or platforms. In other words, the things that exist when we are born are different in every generation and usually better, different and better. I have a Tesla Model 3 at home. I can tell it where to go and it will take me there without me driving the steering wheel. And if I go into a restaurant or a hotel and I've parked it, I can tell it to come and meet me and it'll come and meet me. I mean, that's what I mean by a canvas. There are things out there that we can assume exist and we can decide if we want to incorporate them in our lives and make our lives better, or we can decide not to. That's a personal choice. But there's no doubt collectively as a human race, we raise our collective level pretty much consistently. Of course, there are many setbacks here and there. The other thing is we make mistakes when we do it. Almost nothing we try to do works at first. Almost nothing. The self-driving car that Elon Musk talks about actually, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, can actually self-drive. The rest, he's been selling it for $20,000 or whatever to people who believed it was coming, and it never came. But it actually did arrive a couple of weeks ago. Why? Because he took all the technology out of the car because he believed a camera was good enough to self-drive a car, and he didn't need radar or LIDAR. Everyone disagreed with him, all the experts, and it now works. And it works because it's got a massive computer in the car. It's quite small, but computationally it's massive. And it's good enough to see real-time pictures and know what they are, and just it's driving to them. And that wasn't true before. So we make mistakes in order to get success. Almost everything we ever do, we start with a mistake. If any of you have children, think about teaching your children to go to the bathroom. There's a lot of mistakes before they figure it out. And that's life. That is who we are. We are serial failures who figure things out. And so whenever somebody builds something and it doesn't work, the right response isn't to laugh at them, criticize them. It's to encourage them to go to the next level and do it again. That's true with drugs. It's true with everything. And drugs are a technology, as in a human-produced thing. So let's start with that on the table. It's interesting. Yesterday, Sam Altman, the creator of OpenAI, at least in marketing terms, he didn't write the code, produced a new thing called the intelligence age, which he's coining to kind of say this is now a new age like the industrial age. And in it, he has made a big claim that within a few thousand days, so that could be anything from 3 years to 10 years, we will have what he calls superintelligence. Not we individually, but the world. And what he means by superintelligence, by the way, who's used OpenAI or ChatGPT here? Hands up if you use it. Keep your hand up if you use it a lot. Keep your hand up if you like using it. Okay, I just wanted to get the tone. If you've used it, you'll know that ChatGPT wasn't that great. for about the last 2 years, it's gotten better and better. Last week they released one which has reasoning built in quotes. It's not actual reasoning, but they call it reasoning for marketing reasons. And what it does is it breaks down its thinking, in quotes, into steps that you can see, and you can understand why it went from this point to this point to this point to this point. It can produce spreadsheets and graphs and documents and stuff. It's actually very, very good, but it's just one thing. Superintelligence is when 100 of those can talk to each other to solve problems humans can't really solve. And so superintelligence is when they can do things that humans cannot do. And you might think I'm kind of nuts because I'm from Silicon Valley, but that is not fake. That is real. It will do that, and quite quickly. Probably later this year or early next year, you'll see evidence of it when ChatGPT can talk to, let's say, Claude.ai, and together they can criticize each other and get to a better answer. That's already happening. And so any kind of cynicism one might have about this, you really should just hold your breath and give it a few years, because it's right to point out that it doesn't work sometimes. It's right to point out that it isn't complete or perfect, but it's completely wrong to say it won't get there. It will. And it will, because it's just logic. It's big computers with lots more memory than we've got, able to replicate itself millions of times, whereas we can't, and all go after a problem together and solve it in seconds. That is real. So again, I'm just building groundwork here. So those are the stages. The geography of AI, which is really what we're going to talk about, is very US-centric. Very US-centric. Although the individuals doing it are from Romania, Belarus, Russia, Sweden, you name it, probably from Belgium as well. The American component of the humans who work at these companies may be 10%. And why? Because everyone goes to Silicon Valley, because it's like going to Florence in the Renaissance if you were a painter. You go there because the money is there, the structures are there. Everyone who might think you're crazy in London thinks you're a genius there, even if you're not. So it's like your ego alone would make you want to go there, but it's actually your capability of achieving things fast without friction makes you want to go there. So it's a very attractive magnet for people, and therefore AI is very American-centric from a business point of view, but not from a human point of view at all. It's from a business point of view, it's completely American. There's only one good European AI company. It's called Mistral. It's in France. It just raised $500 million. It's valued at $6 billion, actually euros in both cases. And it's a great team. I guarantee within the next 2 or 3 years that guy's moving to America. He will not stay here. He won't. Not because he's angry with Europe. It just doesn't work for him. I could be wrong, because like a lot of natives, you love your own country, and there are sometimes things that matter more than even your business or your creativity, so he might stay. But it'd be the first if he did. There's a long list of people who've left and gone to the States because of that environment. So let's talk about why. Venture capital is the fuel of innovation. It's where people put money in that they're prepared to lose on the bet that they'll win big enough sometimes to pay off all the ones they lose on. That's basically venture capital. It's gambling, but with a history of known outcomes that suggest if you're good at it, you'll make a lot of money from your winners, which will be best case 1 in 10. Best case, and by the way, that's what I work in. I apply AI to venture capital, and we are right 1 in 3 times because of the AI. And no venture capitalist in the world is right 1 in 3 times. So it has improved venture capital. The EU the US, and let's talk about the UK as well, just to give a comparison, how much do they spend on venture capital? The EU spends $55 per year per person on venture capital, $55. The per capita GPT in the EU is around 40,000 euros. So it's 55 out of 40,000 goes to venture capital. The US, the GDP per capita is double the EU. It's $80,000, as we heard on the previous panel. It spends $510. So it's twice as big, but it spends 10 times more on venture capital. By the way, the UK is pretty good on venture capital. It spends $320, and its per capita GDP is roughly the same as the EU, a little bit more, but more or less the same. So the UK overachieves versus the EU by a lot, roughly 55 versus 320. And the US overachieves versus the UK. The UK's caught up. It used to be much worse. So you can see that if you're not investing in venture capital, and I should also point out, of that $55, 60% of it comes from the European Investment Bank. So it's government money. Whereas in the US, 100% comes from private capital. So it's a massive, massive difference. The EIB gives money to venture funds, so it's kind of hidden. You never see its name. And then those venture funds who are on kind of a supply of money coming from the government puts it into companies. And they get paid 2% of the money in fees every year, and they get 20% of the profit. So they haven't really got a huge incentive for playing a good game, because they're on a permanent money machine. So there's a huge difference there. The conditions for that to change, funnily enough, even if it did change, let's say magically tomorrow we could make the EU give the same per capita amount to venture capital as we do here, it would all have to come from the government, because the private capital won't do that in Europe. Why won't it? Well, firstly, European family offices, wealthy individuals and families, invest in America. You'd be nuts not to. That's where all the companies are. That's where all the gains get made. That's where bottoms-up innovation from people who are kind of almost crazy in their obsession to achieve something live. And so European money, private money, goes to America, almost all of it. If you wanted to fix that, you'd have to replicate Silicon Valley in Europe. Saul Klein is a very good friend of mine. He runs a London-based fund called Local Globe. It's 21 years old this week. Started a project to make London like Silicon Valley 21 years ago. He's actually done a great job, but it's not close to Silicon Valley yet. And so even if we started today in Europe, it would take a long time. What does it mean to be like Silicon Valley? Well, the first thing it means is applauding and rewarding failure. Because failure is trying. And punishing it means you stop trying. So the first thing is to reward failure and reward experimentation, reward science that is not complete but shows promise, and put money behind it. That's the first thing. The second is, in order to do that, you have to find Europe is heavily academic. It's even more true in Japan and China and Russia. The universities and the professors are the core of thought. If I tell you that Larry and Sergey, the founders of Google, who were at Stanford, invented Google at Stanford, but owned all of it. And Stanford got a small stipend from it. Whereas in the UK, where I have done quite a lot of work, at Bristol University, I worked with an entrepreneur who invented the way to project audio into physical feeling. So you could have audio producing controls on objects. His professor owned 70% of the company. His professor did nothing. The 20-something-year-old founder owned 3%, and the rest was owned by Bristol University. So this academic heaviness that believes that thought and ideas, and the value of them belongs or begins with and stays within academia. That's a pretty strong European thought. In America, Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, begs people not to go to university, but to come and work with him at the Founders Fund at the age of 18, and he'll pay them $100,000 a year to train to do startups. Now, I'm not suggesting we should abandon universities, or I'm not anti-academic, but if you want to change the culture of innovation, you have to reward entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, by the way, don't always have the ideas. They have the ability to execute the ideas in the world through passion, through force of storytelling, many skills an entrepreneur has, often not the idea. And so you don't always recognize them as a person of substance. You may even think they're, as we say in America, a wide boy or girl, because they're storytellers. But if you look at Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and you ask what's wrong with them, the answer is a lot. And they're dysfunctional. They're completely dysfunctional, which is why it works, weirdly. It works because they're different. As Steve Jobs once said, think different. And so that is not a European belief system. It's just not part of the European culture to think like that. Except in music. Funnily enough, in music, Europeans are great at producing fantastic musicians who are weird. But in innovation, somehow it's a different part of the brain. So I'm going to finish, because I know that Norman's going to kick me if I don't, soon. How long have I got? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Draghi, I did read the Draghi report. After the last two sessions, I wish I didn't, and I'm almost reluctant to mention it. But I will, because he kind of nails it in one way. And I agree with all the points that were made earlier, so this is not a promotion of Draghi at all, but I just want to retrieve this one quote from him. He says, after explaining a few things, he says, as a result, many European entrepreneurs prefer to seek financing from the US venture capitalists and scale up in the US market. Between 2008 and 2021, close to 30% of the unicorns founded in Europe, that's a company valued at $1 billion but still private, relocated their headquarters abroad, 30%. And the vast majority came to the US. And just to name the names, Stripe, which is the world's biggest payment system, 2 Irish brothers, the Collinson brothers. WhatsApp, a Ukrainian. If you use WhatsApp, he's Ukrainian, went to America. PayPal, Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. Max is Russian, Peter's German. Trivago, German, Ralph Schromgens, sorry. Tom Siebel created Siebel Systems and C3.ai, which is an AI company that's just went public. Jan Bomhoff, Dutch, created PureGym. Sasha Pioniek, French, Ticketmaster. These are global brand names produced by Europeans that all moved to the United States. And by the way, the list is longer, but because I've only got 5 minutes, I'm going to start reading it. Think about which companies do Europeans spend money with on tech? Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Netflix, Uber, Stripe, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Lime, the scooters you see, all American. European euros are flowing out of Europe into American bank accounts because the supply is coming from America. By the way, I'm British and I'm not a big pro-American, so don't mistake this for some kind of patriotism, although I kind of like America, I will say that. So there are some European heroes who understand what to do. I mentioned Saul Klein. Reshma Sohoni, who runs Seed Camp, also in London. Cherry VC, a German venture capital firm. Speed Invest, which is in Germany and the Nordics. Niklas Zenström, the founder of Skype, founded in Estonia, moved to America, now is running a huge venture fund in London called Atomico that just raised $1.4 billion to invest. And Niklas is a proper entrepreneur. He understands how things work. Janus Friis is co-founder from Denmark, funded Perplexity.ai, which is one of the best AI browsers. And Daniel Ek, probably you all know Daniel Ek, right, from Spotify, is funding lots of things in Europe. The Wise founders, the Revolut founders. There are some good news European stories. None of them have anything to do with the European Commission, the European government, or EIB money. They all raise private money from American investors, actually, who recognize them as being like the people they see back in the States. What I'm arguing for here is, if Europe's going to benefit from AI, and by the way, it will, because ownership doesn't really matter when it comes to use. Every European can use the American AI pretty much for free, by the way. You don't pay for it anymore, it's free. 4 billion people in the world have an Android phone or an iOS phone, and they can use it for free, completely for free. It can do every course in school. It can my kids use it, so it's totally free. They make their money from companies, not from individuals, and so you will get to use it, but will Europe get to improve its economy by creating this stuff? It doesn't seem very likely to me. It seems very unlikely. Now, that could be a total downer. Maybe when I sit down, we can talk about how that could not be the case. But at least if you were to rank it right now, you wouldn't think it's going to happen. The qualities of an entrepreneur alienate people. You have to be tenacious. You have to not listen. If you listen, you're dead. I work with entrepreneurs who say, I had 3 meetings with investors today. This one said this one said that, this one said that. I'm going to change my ideas. Dead. The minute you change your idea, you're done. The investor, it's like American Idol, or whatever the equivalent is here, where you go on stage to sing. If the judges see 8 boring people who do what they tell them to do, you know for sure they're not getting the golden thing. The one that gets the golden thing is the one that stands out, the one that's different, the one that can perform. Raising capital for a startup is a performance. It is a performance. It's a story. Now it doesn't work unless the story has substance. You can do it. You've shown already some progress towards doing it. You have a team that have the right skills to do it. But you, the entrepreneur, you're getting the money. That's your job. And you will only do that if you can perform. And in Europe, performance for raising money is called fraud. So with that, I'm going to sit down, and I hope it was controversial.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks very much, Keith. Very interesting. I do want us to come back to the EU and to look at the what AI is purported to do, and particularly to try and discuss some of the barriers that there are to, why is it that Europe is so behind in this space? But I want to challenge you on one thing immediately, which is this, that when you look at the American economy and you look at AI and all the activity around AI, it's obviously a hell of a lot going on, billions being invested, blah, blah, blah. But outside of AI, everything's...
My time is up, according to my...
Outside of AI, it's stagnant. In fact, it's going the other way. And so even the idea that AI is going to solve the productivity problem in America, for example, the jury's still out on that. And so, can you just reflect on that a bit?
Yeah.
Because I think it's quite an important point, the difference between the hype. When I mean the hype, I mean it's not hype in the sense that it's real, there is billions being spent, but how that is going to be diffused and cuts across the entire economy and how it will transform the economy, that is an unknown at this point.
Well, I think broadly speaking, every generation of investors puts 90% of the money into things that are stupid. Every generation. And they survive because the other 10% produces more than 10 times the money they put in. A venture fund that's really good will return about 2 times the money it originally raised, a good venture fund. The median venture fund loses money. The average does quite well. So, because of the big ones, the good ones. But that means out of every 100 VC firms, 80 of them are going to lose your money. So investing in VC firms doesn't make sense. I build indexes across VC firms for that reason, just like you build indexes in the stock market to avoid individual stocks. So the premise of your question is right, that a lot of money is lost. And the sectors that are attracting capital are massively weighted towards AI right now, massively. I think 90% of all the money invested in the last 3 months has gone to AI companies, and 80% of that has gone to about 3 companies. So it's called the power law. It's a well-known thing, the power law. Basically, you double down on the likely winners and you ignore everyone else. It actually makes mathematical and investing sense to do that. But it does mean there's a drought outside of where the rain is falling. And now there are some other sectors that are equally important right now. One is all the work around CRISPR and DNA transformation and drug discovery. It's a very different business to AI, and it uses AI actually to reject samples and stuff. But the core of it is biotech. That's going to, I think that's going to see a very, very, very big leap in terms of what we might expect from it over the next 10 years, and there's a lot of money going into it. The other, which is a bit weirder, because I'm not sure it will ever work, but there are a lot of people who do think it will work, is nuclear fusion. That is to say, not fission that is we talked about so far today, but fusion is basically just water that creates fusion and can produce unlimited amounts of energy and can be shrunk small enough to put into a lawnmower or a car. So you would have sources of energy that don't rely on wind or the sun that could be contained, safely contained as well. There's no waste. And there's a lot of money gone into 5 or 6 companies. And it's gone in repeatedly, so that even though I don't know what's going on, I assume there's some internal success that they're seeing that means they're putting more money into it. It's funny. Stanford University has its fingers in all this. To go back to the academic theme, the professors there are allowed to do side projects, and they get equity in a lot of these things. And so there's a kind of a crossover between academia and if any of you know Palo Alto, there's this University Avenue, and one end of it is all startups, and the other end is Stanford University, and it completely blends. Same as Berkeley. So I don't think it's only about AI, but I think your core idea that AI is almost like a bubble, there's some truth in that. I personally think bubbles are rational and good. That is to say, we're all like that, right? If you see money falling from the sky in the street, you don't run away from it, right? You run towards it. And AI is perceived as a money machine, so everyone runs towards it, which is rational behavior. It's almost impossible to get your money into those companies. So if you succeed, you're very lucky. And therefore the supply of money is much bigger than the demand for money. As was said on the panel this morning, I really agree with that. Bankers raise money and get paid for raising money. They won't even get out of bed unless they think people are running towards you, because they don't want it to be hard. And they basically, make a lot of money doing for people what they want to do anyway. And why do they get away with it? Because they have the access. And they get ahead of the curve. So money isn't the problem. In fact, even if Europe had the money, as I said in the talk, it wouldn't solve the problem because you'd be giving money to fake entrepreneurs. I saw this in Manchester in the UK. I went to a co-op building that was funded by the British government, and I contrasted it. It was an incubator, which you probably heard that word. There's lots of them, and everyone in it was in there to get the government money. They had no clue what they were building or why they wanted to build it. It's fake entrepreneurs on stipends. And when you're an investor and your only interest is making money, you run a mile from those people. There's no way they could ever persuade you to write them a check. So fake entrepreneurs live on government money.
Okay. Sorry, Keith. Let me bring you back to
reality.
Yeah. Bring you back to the room. So let's talk about the EU, because I think the important point about the Draghi report and all of that, and for all the reasons that was said earlier today about being political, is that I think we've got to understand the AI discussion in the context of the EU's kind of strategy for technological sovereignty.
Yes.
Its desire to, become a player in the geopolitics, understands the politics of that and why it's important for it to do that. When you start to look at it from that perspective, you realize that Europe has got a huge mountain to climb. Mm-hmm. Because, and I'll give you just, for example, R&D spending. Okay. Mm-hmm. The World Economic Forum in 2021 did a report on R&D spending in Europe, and they showed that the total EU government R&D spending was 109 billion. Okay, it's not small change that, but the top 7 big US tech companies together in that same period spent 167.5 billion. Mm-hmm. on R&D. Mm-hmm. That's what. So the contrast there is remarkable, and so the capital is not the problem. The problem is the ambition behind it, what the expected outcome is, and it's what we referred to in the first discussion, in the precautionary principle that seems to manifest itself in it. So the scale is that you're talking about the entire EU not even able to invest as much in R&D as 7 companies.
I think of VW. It makes me think of VW. VW obviously has its troubles, and everyone knows VW is also Porsche and Audi. I recently sold a German electric car and bought a Tesla, and it is a night and day different experience. It was a Mercedes. The Mercedes is really plush, luxury, great to sit in, but it's like a car that has had electricity backfitted into it. Whereas the Tesla's like a computer that they put a car around, and the computer's clever to do things. Everything's fantastic about it, and that's because Tesla. Elon Musk, if you look at the amount of R&D Elon Musk put in to get to where he is with Tesla, it's tens of billions of dollars for a startup. And now Europe, I think Siemens and lots of other European companies would have enough money to kind of do whatever they wanted, really. But they don't want to. It's not what they do. And it's just like, I was a lot livelier when I was younger. And I don't do some things now that I did when I was younger. And European business is old. It's old. It doesn't even understand. It wouldn't want to do the things you would have to do. There's a great book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Christensen from MIT, I think. And The Innovator's Dilemma describes how hard it is to stop doing something that's working, to do something better. And the example he uses is Hewlett-Packard. They invented inkjet printers internally, but they sold laser printers. And the laser printer costs $3,000 and an inkjet costs $300. And so they tried to kill it internally. And eventually they spun it out into a separate company. They wouldn't let any of the existing company even see it. And they built a completely new business on inkjet printers. and they did the razor blade strategy where you've got to pay crazy amounts of money for the ink, and it now dwarfs the laser printer business, but it never would have been given life if the executives would have been in charge. So the idea that you can centralize innovation, it's the most decentralized idea in the world. There is nothing more decentralized than innovation, because it's a random individual crazy enough to come up with an idea. If you meet Nicholas Enstrom, he's a total weirdo. And he came up with Skype. He's got some medical condition that means his eyes don't point in the same direction. I'm not criticizing him, it's just a fact. So when you're talking to him, you don't even know if he's looking at you. And he's a completely techie, so he doesn't ever complete a sentence that doesn't include something you don't understand. But he's made several multi-billion-dollar businesses. So that is decentralized. If he walked into a government office, they'd throw him out. And they'd be right to, wouldn't they? Based on what their job is, they'd be right to. So you need a decentralized ecosystem where people like that can find money from people who are looking for them, build stuff, it gets big, and then the society benefits from it in taxes and all kinds of other ways. But if you try to do that top down, there's no way. It's not going to work.
Well, are you looking at me? Or just one fact I want to throw out, just to build on the point that we just discussed about the scale of the challenge. If you look at the combined market capitalization of the top 7 big tech companies in America, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, Netscape, it's about $9 trillion.
If you had NVIDIA, it's a lot more as well.
Yeah. You know, that's about the equivalent to Germany, France, and Spain's GDP.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. That's the scale of and not only that, that concentration is enormous in the sense of you've now got Microsoft, for example, just done a $100 billion deal to reopen 3 Mile nuclear power station to supply it with energy to fuel its data centers. That will back up the whole AI, et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to Europe, when you look at that scale of that challenge, you know, what do you see as a possible route to the future? Because this seems so unscalable in the sense of and not only that when you think about the dominant perspective as being one of precaution, where the regulatory impulse is there rather than the innovative risk-taking, etc., where you've got an AI Act that's already ring-fenced what's harmful and what's not, even before we know what AI is going to be capable of doing. You know, how do you begin to challenge that? What do you think it's going to take for Europe to come out of this slumber? I mean, it's arrogance on the one hand. I think Jacob made this point right at the beginning of the conference. It's complacency. This idea that they think that by regulating big tech, in American big tech, that they're actually going to give Europe a chance to catch up with AI or whatever. It's just a fool's paradise. It just seems to me to be absolutely impossible. So how would you, what would you say to the Commission if they were here?
You know, to be honest, I wouldn't even meet with them because it would be a waste of time. I would rather meet with Nicholas Enstrom and Saul Klein and Reshma Sohoni and, you know, people like that. I have an investment in a company in Germany, in Hamburg. It's called 1.5 or 5.1, one of those two. It's a material science company. And what it does is it uses AI to read patents in material science. And if it has customers who do packaging with plastics in, and it's trying to replace plastics with biodegradable packaging. And so it has a lot of big customers who, if you have got a dishwasher at home and you have those plastic things that you put in the dishwasher with the detergent in, that's its first project, is replacing that. And that company has no government funding whatsoever. It's got normal funding from people in Hamburg. It's run by a guy called Martin Weber, who, by the way, is a total entrepreneur. He knows nothing about material science, but he could tell a story, and he's got PhDs on his team, but he's got no clue what they're doing. He just knows they can do it. And so he tells the stories. And that company is producing recipes for packaging, 10 times a day, new recipes, testing them, finding ones that work, that can contain water, but there's no plastic. That's how you do it. You've got to be working on the ground with people like that, funding them. You can go and raise money. I mean, I don't really care if Nicholas Zennström gets money from the European Investment Bank. Good luck to him if he does. But his job isn't that. His job is to find Martin Weber. And it's got to be bottoms up. And Martin Weber has to have the confidence that you understand all the risks in what he's doing, that he might fail, he might succeed, and you'll still give him money, and you won't be angry with him if it doesn't work. Imagine that mindset. That's a rare mindset, but in Silicon Valley, and it's not all of America, by the way. If I go to Los Angeles, it's just like Europe. If I go to New York, it's just like Europe. It's a specifically Silicon Valley thing, because it's like America is a theme park society. You do media and finance in New York, you do movies in LA, and you do venture capital in Silicon Valley. So it attracts people that understand it, and it's a small place. Like, if you have an argument with somebody there, you shouldn't, because you're going to meet them again in a different thing 2 weeks later, and people move from an idea to a new idea when it's not working, just like that. There's no remorse. And so it's a culture that breeds all of that. And I think you can only create that bottoms up. I don't think it's possible top down. Now, I don't want to sound like there's nothing you can do top down. Obviously, governments can have bad or good policies. And I'm not against asking governments to have good policies. I just don't have the belief that that's the strategy you should employ to fix the problem. It can be something you do as well. I wouldn't say no to a meeting with the European Commission. I'd say just what I'm saying now. But they're not going to do it, are they? So you don't want to hang your hat on that.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll throw this now out to the audience. Please, can we have some hands? Who's got the mics? Right, guys. Richard, at the front here, please. And you can give that one to that gentleman there. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your for the panel so far. It has been great. You have mentioned that government funding for venture capital, always in a quite negative context, like the European Investment Bank is basically behind 60% of all the venture capital in Europe. And this was why did you do that? Is this a good thing, or should the European governments, the EU and the national ones, not spend any capital on venture capital at all? Is it even better to do nothing?
Yeah.
Don't answer.
You want to take a few?
Yeah, I'll take a few. At the back there. Can we have the mic here in the front?
Thanks for the very nice discussion. My name is Lazar Potrebic, and I was thinking of a question actually from a more humanistic perspective. So how can we avoid the risk of innovating too much, that way making our life very comfortable and good? But I think that there is a risk also of then not using then our cognitive skills a lot in order to innovate more and more. So do you think that this risk could be avoided, and basically not creating a circle where more innovation leads to, let's say, more laziness and just enjoying the good life with good technology?
Okay. Can you give the mic to Jacob behind you, please?
Yes, I want to elaborate on that. I very much liked your phrase, as a human race, we raise our level of consciousness continuously. But with all due respect, will AI and more broadly technology be able to solve problems like the gap between rich and poor and the middle class that's getting wider and wider, the climate crisis, look at the flooding in Eastern and West and Central Europe, the raising, selling and addiction to drugs, the human suffering, both mentally and physically, to name just but a few.
Jacob?
Yeah, I might have sometimes some more philosophical kind of concerns around AI or what the kind of future holds. But for these purposes, I mean, we titled this one Unleashing AI for Europe, and it seems to me, I was one of these people who put my hand up and say I use ChatGPT quite a lot and quite enjoy using it, etc., etc. Well, the thing that strikes me is that so many of the, not just the companies, but generally as Europeans, and oddly enough, I noticed this, my colleagues who are great excluded, but I noticed this especially around young people, the kind of the way in which, like, both intellectually and then also in the setup of people's working lives, how kind of unable people seem to actually utilize new technologies that come around like AI. And it seems that, but we're going to do, ChatGPT will be able to do and can already do like a whole bunch of things. But the step for us seems to be actually, how do we put this into practice? And especially when young people come into workplaces, you hear these stories all the time. They can barely use a file system. They don't know how to connect to a printer, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's, like, especially here in Europe, where companies are so resistant to new ways of working, so kind of stuck in the past, and above all, as Norman said, so complacent, so unwilling to change. The real thing that we have to kind of try and address is we can have these technologies that can potentially do amazing things, but we'll be stuck working in exactly the same way for the next 20 years unless something really, really radical changes. I don't quite know how you make that change, but it seems to me that that move from the existing technology to putting it into practice is really at the heart of this discussion.
All right, thank you. Could that mic come to the front here, please? Oh, sorry, could you give it to Phil first, and then we'll come here. Please, John?
Yes. Name is John Webber. I was writing in the EU on all the digital for the simple reason that do no harm was actually meant to get all the lawyers out so that they didn't kick it, closed it. Do no harm is exactly do no harm, and by that reason you couldn't grab it so that there was more space. My question to you. Right now we're working on tiny IE because IE is just linguistic, and by the linguistic you can, well, linguistic goes slow, so you can catch it. However, decision making, why we are using IE, is non-cyclic decision making on a human, so we have literacy and need, where we are working on. So my question to you is, what do you think about tiny IE as we are using American computers again, who are not made to do quantum computing and have at least, well, we only have 5 differences that we can work with, and that's where it stops. As well in the United States, as well as here. So if we are going for another approach, what we could do, because it's called unleashing IE in Europe, we have the opportunity to do that tiny IE. However, we get confronted with American producers of computers that wants to stop the printing of the chips in Europe. So what's your approach to that? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take Phil, and then I'll give you a chance to come back on not all of it, but just some of it. Yeah. Okay. Phil.
Thanks, Keith. I learned an awful lot about Silicon Valley and venture capital, and I learned a point which I've read before, which is that Silicon Valley is a pretty unique place, you know, even in America, which leads me to say, well, you know, the idea of setting up a Silicon Valley in Europe or whatever is a no-go, really. But I don't really think that's a particular problem. And so I really want to pick up more, extend more what Jacob was saying. I very much agree, Keith, with the way you sort of posed technology and set the framework at the beginning, that technology is about people. And another aspect of that is, I think, to make an important distinction between invention and innovation. And it seems to me what you've been describing is the invention. Silicon Valley and VCs there have got a particular openness and a particular way of working, a particular network, which allows that to happen there. But what's not happening in Europe, and actually it's not happening in America either, is that these new technologies, whether it's AI or anything else, are not actually being applied, being diffused are being invested in outside its own sector. I mean, there's I don't know if you saw the IBM ranking of AI applications that came out at the end of last year, but it was really telling. I mean, maybe IBM have got their own agenda here. But when it looked at which companies were actually using AI, the ones which were way ahead were all in Asia, right? It was Singapore, it was South Korea, it was China, even India, right? Where it was way ahead. Over 50% of companies said they were using AI. If you looked at Europe and America, they were all around the 25 to 30% mark, right? So this is the end of 2023. So the problem isn't the invention of AI. I bow to you in terms of its potential in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's the fact that even what AI there is not being invested in, innovating, changing the way that businesses are working in the old economies, both America and in Europe. So how do you see the barriers to actually, as we're talking about unleashing AI, what do you put your finger on as the barriers as to why things are moving so slow in the innovation front?
Okay, Keith, very briefly, please.
Well, let's start with that one, and then I'll work my way. I can't answer all of them because it's going to take too long, but maybe there'll be another chance. The distinction is good between invention and innovation, although they're often very closely related. One company I created was called Real Names, and the invention was the idea that languages that don't include the narrow Latin character set should be able to use the internet using their language. So I wanted it to be so that you could type in Chinese and go to a website, or type in Hungarian and go to a website. And Real Names literally was a spreadsheet with 2 columns. Column A had a keyword in any language. Column B had a URL that it should go to. It was a 2-field database, and I had to make it scale. That 2-field database cost nothing to build. It was just an idea. But no one else had the idea. Everyone thought the internet was only for English. This was 1995. I built it, and my first customer was AltaVista, the search engine. If you remember AltaVista, run by Louis Monnier, who was a French exile in the US, studied at INRIA in Paris. And then my second customer was Google. Google said my database was better than their algorithm at finding the right place to go in languages other than English. So I met with Larry and Sergey every single week. My third customer was Microsoft. They put it in the browser so that you could type it in the browser. So today when you use Chrome and you type something, it just goes to a web page. That's me. So it's called direct navigation. Did it in every language. My very quickly, biggest customer was the Chinese government. Paid me $10 per Chinese word per year. Imagine that. So invention is sometimes not very much. Innovation is the act of making it happen. And making it happen was a series of relationships, building the database, making it scale. It was hundreds of millions of queries a day, even then. Making it scale, doing the deals, and getting revenue. So you're right, Phil, to say that there's a blockage. I don't think that blockage is going to go away, because I think companies have the same innovator's dilemma as governments, which is mostly they're so comfortable with what they've already got that they're the last to innovate. And what happens is startups go around them. Call centers is a great example. So call centers, where there's hundreds of people answering the phone, I guarantee anyone that's got a call center will not have a call center very soon, because the software is very good at that. It can do proper, in English at least. I don't know if it's good in every language, but in English it's very good. And so it'll answer all the questions. It has all the customer histories there to know, what the previous answers was. There won't be call centers, and cost savings will drive that, not innovation instincts. So it'll be a cost savings instinct. But most of the innovation will come from startups that take this technology and do new things with it, and are small today, and will get big. And companies like Google will act a little bit like Microsoft did with the iPhone. they won't understand how big it is until it's too late. And Google has kind of caught up a bit now with Gemini, but it's still quite far behind. Microsoft's totally not in the race. It's having to partner with all these startups. Amazon's not in the race. So even big tech companies have this innovator's dilemma. And that's why startups are so valuable, because they're the ones who run with things that don't seem real at first. And then by the time they are real, they're very valuable. And it's too late for the big guys to do it.
Keith,
You want to shut me up,
I'm
yeah.
going to ask you to just hold back for the moment, because there's a lot more people want to get in. I'll try to get as many people in, and then I'll give you some time at the end.
Okay.
Frank?
Hi, Keith.
He was my teacher
Can we have the
when I
other
was in
mic
school.
to this gentleman there. Thank you.
So I think you're slightly romantic in the way you portray Silicon Valley, because you make it sound like this, like Florence in a Renaissance period, and overlooking the fact that what works in the Silicon Valley is predicated upon a number of factors which cannot be replicated, that haven't got that much to do necessarily with the incredibly entrepreneurial orientation of the individuals concerned, but have got to do with the fact that this is a place where a lot of global exiles, and they are principally exiles, managed to have a marriage with Stanford University and some of the best academic environments that are around. And there is a danger that the talk that entrepreneurs talk becomes a kind of seen as a fount of wisdom, rather than simply what it is a bit of a hustle. And I think that's number one, that's quite important to remember. The second thing, and I'm 90% sure that I'm right on this, is that Silicon Valley is a little bit parasitical on everything else that goes on in the world. And even the capital that venture capitalists use for startups is predicated upon the fact that there is so much money around the system, because the American and other governments are just literally printing money left and right. And all these big companies in Europe and America have this cash mountain that they're too scared to invest it in their own businesses. And that's the tragedy, that there is all this capital around, but it's not used as capital, but is used parasitically, so that somebody else, not that company, will make money for them. And Silicon Valley is the beneficiary of all this money that's been around. So I think that's something that needs to be borne in mind, that there's a parasitical element here. And finally, there's one thing I'd like you to think about, which is this. I think the secret ingredient that you haven't mentioned is something more foundational than just simply individual attitudes and psychologies and behavior, which is cultural. And when you look around the globe today, you'll find that there are a number of places which have a cultural orientation towards entrepreneurship, making money, taking long-term investment decisions. They're not only in Silicon Valley. If you look at India, for example, I mean, many of the Indian entrepreneurs strike me as being, really model entrepreneurs in the way they're going around the globe, sort of making things happen. So there are a few people, few places like that. And Mumbai is an interesting place for that reason, and there are some bits in Asia that are a bit like that. And the trouble is that in Europe, we are culturally not disposed towards this kind of orientation. European culture is so singularly risk-averse, so institutionalized in terms of its fear of taking that first step, that it's created this stagnant, sort of milieu. And stagnation is bad enough, but when that stagnation is philosophically legitimated by ideas like sustainability, somehow if you're sustainable, that's okay. But sustainable just simply means more of the same. I mean, that's what it really means. Being sustainable doesn't mean that you go forward, you progress. It means just more of the same. If you look at all the ideologies that are dominant in Europe, they're about staying still and making a virtue out of that. That's what the European Union does. It makes a virtue out of not making any decisive steps forward. So I just want to know what you think about the cultural element, because I think that's ultimately even a bigger problem than the bankruptcy of bureaucratic institutions and their slothfulness.
A very, very useful point. I'm afraid I am going to have to have one more question. I know. Sorry, you've had the mic for a while. But not you first, and you will be the last question. That'll just give you at the most 3 minutes, because we have to be finished by 6. I've been told, but
I'm going to be super polite.
there's an EU
Really?
there's an EU regulation that says we have to be finished by 6.
Okay, so I'm gonna be quick. So for a good AI, you need two very important resources. One is computer capacity, which is just basically money, which we've been talking about. But the other one is big data, enormous amounts of data. And could or should the EU help with this aspect for the entrepreneurs or even for existing companies?
Explain how they could.
I think there are ways. He has some tools that an individual don't have.
Okay.
Well,
Right.
there was 50 big tech companies in Europe who just signed this letter saying that the way the GDPR is being interpreted in the member states is preventing the access to big data. So, there's one of the regulatory problems.
If you were 20 again, what would you do?
Don't answer that.
No.
Okay, Keith, I know it's impossible to reflect on everything, but I do think that this point about the cultural thing is really a critical question.
Yeah. So I'd be dating. Because I wouldn't have met my wife yet, so she wouldn't mind. Should governments do nothing? No. They can do what they want, but they're not the solution. It's a sideshow. The more they do, the better. It's just not the solution. Could tech make us useless and lazy? Tech is going to remove jobs, for sure. There may be new jobs, for sure. But at some point, automation will be all-pervasive. So we need to get used to being human. People used to struggle to reduce the working day. They used to fight and get killed by soldiers because they were trying to get an 8-hour working day. A lower working day is a good thing. I don't think laziness equals not working. I think it just gives you time to do things you enjoy. I do a lot of things I don't get paid for that take hours, and I love them. So I think I think some people will get lazy for sure, but I don't think you can say that work or lack of tech makes you a better human being. I think it's the opposite. The lack of pressure to do things that society can do automatically now releases you to do other things. That's good. I don't think AI can solve social problems at all. So that's on us. I think the cultural thing is, well, first parasitic. I think everything new is parasitic on the past. So I'd say yes, it is parasitic, Silicon Valley, but not in a bad way. It sucks up whatever is useful, like a parasite does, that it needs to live. And so you could say that's a negative thing. And it is full of itself. I agree with that as well. So there is a kind of hubris around it. So that's true. But I think that kind of goes with the territory of saying you're creating the next thing. You're going to be a bit hubristic. And you're going to be wrong mostly as well. So you do get humble over time. I can tell you I've had way more failures than successes. So I don't go around thinking that the sun shines out of my backside. My wife keeps me very level. She reminds me of all the bad things I did that didn't work out. So I'm not too worried about that. But it is parasitic, and they do think they're the font of wisdom, and that is a bit off-putting when you meet some people. Not everyone's like that. The older they are, the more humble they are, because they've been corrected. But I think your main point about the cultural symmetry between culture and stagnation mindset, and where sustainability seems to be the best thing you can think of instead of what the future might hold, that is exactly a human condition. It's funny because I go to China a lot, and I find the Chinese young people to be super optimistic and super creative and very hungry for money, hustling, and create things because of that. And the government really doesn't care. They keep out of that. even though it's not a democracy, it kind of doesn't impact these kids that much in their day-to-day life. And they come to America, by the way, and become very successful. India, frankly, I've never been to India, so I take your word for it, but it feels the same, where there's an optimism. And if you're not optimistic, it's super hard to drive yourself to do something hard if you're not optimistic. So I think optimism, I actually don't think Americans are very optimistic anymore. At a personal level, I don't see that. I think most of the Silicon Valley optimism is coming from non-Americans. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to be a billionaire with single rank. How nuts is that? So with that said, I am who I am, and I think what I think, and I'm from Yorkshire.
Thanks very much, Keith.